Hey everybody, my name is Miles Shellshear. I'm the executive editor at The Signal, and today we are going to be going behind the scenes of our Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American Heritage Month campaign to give y'all a little bit of insight into how we make the decisions we make for the coverage that we did during this month.
I'm Emily Alyssa Wolfe, and I am the Signal's Editor-in-Chief.
Hi, I am Alyssa Shotwell. I am the online editor of The Signal.
Hi, my name is Jenna, and I am a senior reporter.
So our first question is, what is the importance and why should people care about Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American heritage?
So I think it's important to celebrate every single Heritage Month that there is, but I think it's important to celebrate APIDA Heritage Month because they are underrepresented and people, and there's a wide variety of people even in the Harris County area. So I think it's important to dive deep into what they do, their cultures, their traditions, and everything.
Yeah, I think going off of what Jenna said, it's such a diverse group of people, and like honestly, each region or people, they could have their own Heritage Month, and so because it's all like kind of clumped together with Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi, I think it's really important to highlight these stories, and because they are typically clumped together, and so you want to shine lights on each individual group and stuff like
that. So to continue that kind of train of thought, same. And I think, sorry, when I did an explainer a few months ago about whitewashing of history and racism in textbook design, writing it, I was like, when I was thinking about the other groups outside of Black Americans, thinking about those within the APIDA category or Hispanic and Latinx, like they often will get maybe one chapter, and for all of the countries and nations that encompass APIDA heritage, the Chinese Exclusion Act is the only thing you really get. Even in civil rights history, they aren't discussed as much despite the work of activists and organizers. So I think it's just another way of bringing attention to that community and their contributions and just their cultural heritage.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think for myself as well, one of the biggest things is the gaps in my own knowledge that kind of drive me to feel that this is an important campaign to do. Because as y'all mentioned, this is a very underrepresented population. It is a very wide and diverse population, including, Asian people that kind of reside on the Asian continent, as well as the Pacific Islander type people and, the Desi as well, the South Asian group, which often also kind of gets overlooked in the Asian conversation. So learning about each of those various populations and how they kind of fall under this APIDA umbrella is a really important and interesting thing that I think people should know more about. So why did we choose APIDA as our kind of acronym over AAPI, which seems to be a highly popular identifier for the month?
We really chose this one. We had long conversations, but basically, like you were saying, the Desi population typically gets overlooked in favor of East Asians. So we really wanted to make sure that that group was highlighted and represented, and I think Desi was just a really good inclusive term for that. Not because they're not Asian American or anything, but we did want to like bring awareness to the fact that, hey, this group of people are in fact part of it, like the AAPI group. So that's really where we went with that.
For sure.
Something I wanted to add to that is when we're talking about any cultural heritage month, language is very, very important. when we have Black History Month, we talk about Black versus African American. In Hispanic Heritage Month, Hispanic, Latinx, Spanish. So these conversations are always happening. It's just with this one, we want to point it out because it's a little different. It's a little underrepresented.
Absolutely. All right, so what do you want people to take away from this campaign?
So I think for me is when I first got onto this campaign is I didn't know anything about APIDA Heritage Month. So I really had to do a lot of research on it. So if people can take one thing away is I want them to like really understand these people and have like more empathy towards this group, this population of people.
So I think right now we're experiencing an increase in hostility and attacks and vitriol aimed towards those in the API or APIDA grouping. And so I just really wanted to like help put out information that is kind of showcasing this heritage and not really adding to, you know, the hate that's being out there. I think just to educate and inform people is really what I want people to take from this.
For me, as well as we're highlighting the uniqueness, something that I want people to take away from the campaign is a lot of the overlapping similarities that the APIDA community has with every community, not just communities of color, but just white Americans too. And so a lot of elements of the campaign that we're bringing up is the relationality between those under APIDA and those that are Black, or those that are APIDA and white or Latinx or Hispanic. So a lot of the conversations that we had in some of the explainers and myths versus fact have to do with how we talk about these groups together and separate, because a lot of times from what I've seen, when the Asian community is discussed, it is very much East versus West, or a just what is different, instead of talking about shared struggles. So this is things like the DACA post. This is things like the model minority myth. So that's something I really want people to take away, is not just the uniqueness, even though that's awesome. It's I also want people to take away a lot of the sameness in every way. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that for myself as well, focusing on kind of the myth and fact type posts and the explainer type posts is some of the most interesting content in my view, because it helps, like Emily said, to inform and educate our audience about these heritages, about the issues that, you know, we kind of have in common, of course, as Alyssa mentioned, as well as, you know, some of the more unique things that happen within these populations and their respective communities. So yeah, I think in terms of what I want people to take away is definitely that information and education about the topic that they may not have had before. So that's kind of a good progression into how we started to choose these topics. So tell me a little bit about how y'all chose the topics.
I think for me is I just really wanted to be on this campaign because I didn't know really anything about the APIDA population. So it was really nice to like educate myself on it for sure.
So I kind of came with the idea that, oh my goodness, all this stuff that's happening right now. Oh, we can all blame it on one person who spent an entire 4 years demonizing a group of individuals. And so I just sort of was like, I know that they struggle because they're people of color, and obviously that's a different thing for, you know, white people. We don't understand that. But I didn't realize just how ingrained into our society these tropes and these, you know, generalizations were. It wasn't until this was brought up a lot during this meeting, especially between me and Alyssa. There's a Try Guys video where they did this whole thing, and it really broke down things into like the mild minority myth and yellow peril. And I was just like, oh my goodness, this is so interesting. And like, I think of myself as a highly educated individual. And if I don't know this stuff, like most people don't know it. And so I really wanted to help spread the word and stuff like that.
So I thought about one, because this was the first full one. There was like a mini campaign last year, but since this was the first full one, we need to make sure we have some of the basic information out. So looking at the population at UHCL, you know, in Houston, some key historical stuff, not everything, because like I said, the Chinese Exclusion Act, even though it's very important, and it relates to every single one of the other things we talked about, we also want to bring up the stuff that's less discussed, and continues conversations that have been happening over the last year, and more. So I think that was kind of the basis in how I was trying to pitch ideas, was what are some very specific things that you need, that ground information, like numbers, like some major countries, and I'm saying major as in the people that are in Harris County and Texas in the US, like where is the majority of them coming from, their families are coming from. So that was a basis of it, and then trying to come in with some of the more complicated things. But I feel like this year, as the starting year, a lot of it was just basis information, because like Emily said, like even though we're in college and we're in our different degrees and we may be some of the most educated people in our family, on paper we're still ignorant in a lot of the ways media, both news and entertainment, has portrayed this group of people. Some of the stereotypes and stuff are so complicated because they go back further than the founding of the US, and we just like kind of continued those. So it's really hard to deal with it. And I think I like the way we did it in our campaign.
Yeah, I agree. I think, as Emily kind of mentioned, there's a lot of conversation with, you know, the hashtag Stop AAPI Hate that have been coming out recently because of obviously the xenophobia kind of stemming from the pandemic and some of the, you know, East versus West tension that stemmed from that. And so I think it's really important that we dispelled some of those myths and that we, you know, covered some explaining type information to educate people about these populations and show that they are more than this stereotype or more than this media portrayal that we're so used to seeing. And so, yeah, I think that for myself, when it came to the topic selection, I wanted to, like, as y'all mentioned, I wanted to ensure that we kind of covered that aspect of this entire topic. And so I'm really glad with the way that that's turned out. So as you guys were kind of working on the campaign, what did you find most surprising?
I think with me, it was just all the research and all the numbers in particular, especially like the numbers in like Houston. I think it was like over 3 million people. And then even Harris County. And it was really interesting to see like there's like an increase in like people even like getting their bachelor's degrees like of like Asian descents, and it was really cool to see all those numbers for sure.
So mine was, and I was like, oh, I know so much because I know that like Desi is different. Like it's different, but it's the same as like Asian American. It's like a subculture or subgenre, subgrouping. Sorry, but like I thought that there was only like 4 groups of Pacific Islanders. There's like the Samoans, the Tongans, Native Hawaiians, and then the Maori. And there are so many more that like you don't ever hear about because the media doesn't cover them, or and so it was just really shocking to see just how many and how wide this group was.
A majority of my learning has been coming from other people's research because I only wrote 1, maybe 2 I'm not trying to take credit for other people's. I think I only wrote one. So a lot of the affirmative action stuff, because that's the one that I wrote, I did know. So it was a refresher to make sure I'm not kind of assuming things. So I read and watched a lot more about it. So a lot of what I've learned have come from other people's. And so things like with the model minority myth one that I believe Emily wrote, um, I understood the concept, but I didn't know some of the effects of it. So about depression and other other mental and physical and emotional um, outcomes of those bad things. So I knew that this thing happened and it was bad, and why it affected things like employment, and it ties up with a lot with the affirmative action one. So I knew a lot of those, but I didn't think about like what emotional toll that can take on somebody, and kind of the trauma that incurs, and how they similar to the Black community might internalize it and it be generational, and how stressful that is. Like I made those connections in reading Emily's, and then in Jenna's one about the numbers. I just didn't know, like I had no concept of that. So all that was new.
Yeah, I agree. I think for myself, when it came to the data about students at UHCL, I was really shocked by how low our numbers were for Pacific Islander students. And it's interesting because it's one of those groups that many people don't think about as often, I would say. And so to see that population represented, in the below 10 number for each academic year. I think the highest number was like 3 or 4 years ago. We had 7 total enrolled Pacific Islander students, undergrad and grad. And to see that information was really shocking to me, because it's like you kind of, you don't see Pacific Islanders very much in the media. And so to really see that kind of lack of representation reflected in the enrollment numbers, and to think about the impact that has on the student body and those particular students, as well as kind of an institutional maybe lack of engagement and involvement with spreading information about that identity or sharing more with the university community as a whole. So I would hope that in the future maybe UHCL can do a little bit more to up that kind of representation and engagement and enrollment from Pacific Islander students. Yeah, that was really shocking to me.
I want to add something to that, just so it's not like it's not necessarily that we need more like
Right.
numbers, so we're checking it off. That I would love to see UHCL do more programming, regardless as if they're here or not, because it benefits everybody to be able to empathize and understand the different, like Emily said, way more than 4 cultures that there are that make up Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think the more programming and the more kind of information that's out there, the better. So this is the last question. What is something in the campaign that didn't quite work or fit, but that you think more people should know about?
I think this is a hard question, because I feel like we did like a lot of stuff and we put out really good information. However, there's like a lot more that we could have done, but it's like we only have like a limited time to do it. So that was probably the issue, is like timing wise. But I think it would have been cool to put out like different organizations in the Houston area that do support APIDA populations. And then also, like, to piggyback off of what y'all said, like, what can like UHCL do for these groups of people, and like all the programs that they can potentially hold.
So this was something like when we were planning, I didn't really even know about. It wasn't until I was doing more and more research. And that's about like the mental health of Americans, like living in America, who have family members or are of the heritage of Desi Americans, especially right now with what's going on in India with the COVID-19 issues, and then farmers strikings and stuff like that. So I would have loved to do more, like, as of this month, research on, mental health and like what, like, resources that we could give that would help maybe, or something like that. Like I said, I didn't even know this was an issue until I started doing research.
So one thing that didn't quite fit, it was kind of discussed, but it was hard to fit in, and I still am in the learning process of it, so I didn't want to fight for it more, was the con like how we've imagined, I say we as in like America and Western Europe, imagined the East as a concept, even though who does that center, because the East is a direction, right? And that is a concept of Orientalism, which was termed by scholar Edward Said. I learned a lot about him in my class with Dr. Subramanian. We didn't read any of his stuff, but I bought his book. So maybe in the future, I'm gonna it could be brought in. It's just so big, and this campaign was so focused on we had to be on the immediate and the background information. And in this concept, in this theory, it examines all of the made up ways that we kind of collage Asian cultures together. I think with the internet and how certain Eastern cultures like Japan and South Korea have been able to beca- have an international audience with their media, they've been singled out, as well as India because of Bollywood, as more cultural understanding. But a lot of the other ones are kind of blurred together. And we see that when we ask people to point out where's Pakistan on a map, and they'll point 4 countries away, right? Not everybody has to be good at geography, but if we could recognize the differences between them and recognize that they also have cultural histories that are sometimes in conflict, oftentimes working together, and not see it as a mishmash of China is generally here and China generally believes this. And when we're talking about China, are we talking about the government, or are we talking about the people? Um, so that's a concept that I'm not mad we didn't work in, because it's so big. I'm still trying to put my head around it. Um, but looking at our media more critically, even if there's no Asian characters, think about the ways that Asian histories have influenced where the characters are in the film. I'm trying not to be too specific. I'm sorry if that's mysterious. I'm thinking of the Pride and Prejudice thing I told Emily about, like, where does the tea come from? Where are the soldiers coming from? Where are they serving? They're all over the Asian continent and the Pacific Islands later in the 1900s and 1800s. So things to think about.
For sure. I think for myself, something that didn't kind of work or fit that I would have liked to know more about, and that I think other people would like to know more about. We've kind of alluded to how, diverse the population of APIDA and the umbrella, kind of everybody that could fall under it, is. But I do I'm always really intrigued by, the cultural rituals and the norms and the I love food. I'm a food guy. I would love to learn about foods. I love to learn about, kind of like rites of passage and rituals that cultures like to kind of practice. And so I'm a little bit disappointed we didn't get to cover that. But as I said, there's such a wide breadth of people and countries included under this APIDA umbrella that it really would almost be impossible to like fairly cover each culture as it, deserves to be. So I wish, and I would hope, I guess, and I would encourage people to explore those heritages. Like you said, Alyssa, look into what countries are Asian and kind of fight against that mishmash that a lot of popular media kind of pushes into us, whether we think about it or not, and kind of challenge those preconceptions and learn more about some of these cultures and heritages and their histories. Personally, I was really, really intrigued by the history of some of the U.S. territories with the APIDA populations. So I would definitely recommend people read up on that. And I do wish that we could maybe get into more of that, but yeah.
I second everything everybody said. I was muted, but I was like, when you said U.S. involvement.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any final thoughts that they want to share about the campaign, about our coverage, or anything like that?
What I have something to add is that you don't have to wait till next May. You can engage with APIDA material throughout the year. And when I say material, I'm saying online. There's tons of places in Houston. Full disclosure, I work at one of them. But even beyond that, there's the Chinese Cultural Community Center. There's several organizations that you can engage with their programming, that it may seem that they're there just as resources of people that of that heritage, but almost all of them welcome people not of those communities, because that means that you're going to be able to be a better advocate, an ally for those people when legislation comes up, or that may harm them, or just in celebration, so we can say things that are maybe a little less ignorant, and I say that myself included. So engage with your community.
I absolutely agree with that. Definitely. All right. Well, if any of y'all listening are interested in writing, planning, or designing anything for future Signal campaigns or other content, feel free to give us an email at thesignal@uhcl.edu, and we can get you involved with our publication. My name is Miles Shellshear. I'm the executive editor for The Signal, and this has been our APIDA Heritage Campaign podcast. Thank you so much for listening.